Beautiful.
Asset. Okay. So today we are here with Jake Parent of Breath.energy. Jake is a former C-level executive who now works with breathwork and plant medicine to help people live elegant lives. So Jake, I love that word elegant.
Mhm.
What does that mean to you? And how do you do that?
Well, elegant to me means that it's simple, beautiful, and effective. That many times people confuse elegance with ornate, and ornate means it can be really beautiful, but like there's no actual functionality. And I think a lot of times what people are looking for in their life is um, they have something that's effective, maybe, and that it's taking a lot of effort, probably taking a lot more effort than it needs to get to the result that they're wanting, and that it can be easier than it is. Like just overall life can be easier than it is and still be beautiful and still be effective. That not everything has to be like sometimes, yeah, you have to work really hard, but then other times I think people have a hard time, have difficulty accepting how easy things can be sometimes.
I feel like you're speaking to me. That was my life in a nutshell until recently, making
Hmm.
everything harder and more dramatic and just harder than it needed to be. And so you've been with me along most of the steps of my journey the last, how many years has it been? 3 years now.
Hmm.
And you've seen that transition from hard to not so hard. And what do you have a saying that you use during ceremony and breath work?
Hmm.
It just like in life, it can be maximum effort or ease and grace.
Hmm.
Ever since I've heard that, I've used that saying on a daily basis. I'm like, okay, Jeri, ease and grace. Ease and grace. Now, but for me, I have kind of found that there's like when you're used to things being hard and kind of living from that place of anxiety, which I think a lot of our world, especially in the Western world, we kind of live from that space. Um, when I started removing that out of my life and replacing it with ease and grace, I almost have sometimes still have anxiety that I don't have anxiety.
Hmm.
So, how do you fix that?
I mean, for us, the solution for that is breath work.
Mhm.
That like there is a lot of mindset coaching, and I think mindset and therapy they give you strategies, they give you techniques, they give you words to say, they give you mantras, but they don't necessarily give you the emotional capacity to deliver on those.
Mhm.
And that like it's fine to like have your therapist or your coach tell you, hey, you should just tell your boss that's inappropriate. And it's like, yeah, well, when I'm triggered and saying the words that is inappropriate seems rather easy. What I want to do is scream at him and, throw a slimline stapler at him. And that breath work and ceremony give you that capacity so that you can go into situations a little bit more calmly and accept them, that it removes that visceral nature from your body of that feeling of angst or unsettledness that is very it is very primal, it is very in your body, that anxiety you're feeling isn't in your head. um I recall a time that I was in a Starbucks drive-through and the car in front of me was not pulling up. Like they wouldn't get within one car length of the car in front of them, which seems like a rather minor infraction. Um, and I'd already done a bunch of work, and in my head, I'm like, this isn't really that big a deal. Um, there's nothing here to be upset about. But inside my body was like, this is definitely a big deal, and we need to do something about this. This is, all hands on deck emergency. And I'm like, why is there this discordant nature between like this person, you know, holding us up from placing our order, not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things, but like the anxiety and tension inside of me is going, oh, this is definitely a big deal. And that breath work and ceremony help alleviate that feeling in your body so that you can, have that harmony and that congruence within yourself.
That's so true. When you were talking about, being triggered by your boss, So I don't have a boss, but my business partner is my husband.
So you all kinds of triggered.
Yeah, so I may
Yeah,
have thrown the stapler at him once or twice.
right.
But but you're exactly right. I had, years of therapy, coaching, all of the things, and yet here I was still being completely triggered in my body, not necessarily throwing the stapler, but throwing words, and a
Hmm.
minute later regretting that because it wasn't logical, but it was coming from some place within my body that I almost couldn't even control.
Hmm.
And after having worked with you for the last several years, I don't have those instances. Those instances are rare, or they're much more manageable.
Hmm.
And so, how exactly does breathwork and ceremony do that? What I believe is that somehow it's like at a cellular level, I feel this like space create. Like it's almost like the energetic cells in my body unravel a little bit and allow breath
Hmm.
in there, allow God in there, maybe. And all of a sudden what seemed like such a big deal isn't quite such a big deal anymore.
Right. Um, yeah, that's an accurate way of putting it. The way that I look at breath work and at plant medicine ceremonies is that there's the logical explanation that I'll give you, and then there's going to be the supernatural explanation.
Give us both.
Um, yeah. So the logical explanation is that the type of breath work that we do, the first thing that it does is it creates connection between your body, your mind, and your emotions. So that you have that connection. And most people don't realize how like I feel disconnected. It's like, all right, well, what is it that you're disconnected from? It's like, well, those three things aren't online and talking to each other. So the first thing that we have to do is connect those to each other. Well, now your conscious self is online and live. Hey, we got the whole system booted up. And that after you have that whole system booted up, all right, now we can connect your conscious mind, your conscious being to your subconscious being. And that's where a lot of that conflict takes place, in that we have the cognitive dissonance between what we say we want and what we actually want. That like, hey, I want to be rich, but I think rich people are evil. Hey, that could cause a problem in your life if your subconscious theory is like rich people are bad. It's going to be difficult for you to become a rich person. Hey, I want to lose weight, but I really like tacos. Those are, my core values are tacos, not being skinny. So that's going to be a problem if those two things are in conflict with each other. So when we do breath work, what we're doing is we set an intention, and that intention is our conscious mind sending a message, preparing a message, so that when we do breath work and we get those two systems talking to each other, your conscious and your unconscious or your subconscious, when those two talk to each other, that the conscious can give the subconscious a new message, and that the subconscious can give the conscious feedback on how that's going to work. So that is a lot of what I think is happening in breath work and in ceremony. And then I guess where it gets supernatural and weird is that underneath your subconscious is the super consciousness, the consciousness of all. Some people call it source, divine, that there is only one source, and that through your subconscious you can connect to that super consciousness or that divine or the source, and then from there you discover, remember your true nature and go, oh, that conscious thing that I thought I wanted, that was a commercial from Madison Avenue. That's not what I really want. What I really want is this other thing, and that's where my true nature lies, and that I need to follow that.
Mm.
um so it's a two-way street, and that which you start with, it's I always joke that when people pray, it's like they're climbing up on Santa Claus's knee, and they think they're going to tell God what it is. Like, hey, this is what I want. And God's like, that's cute. Now,
God has said that to me a couple times.
yeah, now here's what you're really going to do. And you're like, poop. So yeah.
But like you said, I think that comes back to elegance.
Hmm.
It removes all the extra stuff that we think we want that really isn't in alignment with our true self or with the nature of God and being connected to God.
It's true. And it has been and continues to be fascinating to me to watch people grieve about giving up their false selves.
Mm,
And they do a trip. I personally did it, but
yeah.
it's like, oh yeah, that's not really you. And it's like, all right, well, I'm going to mourn the death of this person that never really existed beyond like the artificial thing that I made up that was never really me.
Okay, so we're gonna go there.
Okay.
Um, so that is a big process of this, or that is a big part, I think, of this whole process. People call it awakening today,
Hmm.
is that discovering who you truly are
Hmm.
and then grieving who you thought you were. Or I don't know. Sometimes I think grieving happened for me, and sometimes it was just like almost who am I if I'm not that? And what will
Hmm.
other people think of me?
Right.
And the interesting thing for me throughout this process, I've had a lot more worry of what other people would think than I thought I did,
Hmm.
because I'm kind of a type A, like leader, bossy person. I just assumed that I didn't really care as much as I apparently do what other people think. And that's been a part of that process for me. And however, the interesting thing has been the more that I open up and show who I think people didn't realize I was, they're less surprised than I thought they would be. They're like, yeah, always, that's you. Like,
Hmm.
oh, you knew it all
Hmm.
along.
Right.
I think what people, at least in my life, saw the striving and all the extra stuff and realized that it wasn't my true self. Do you think that happens? Or I think a lot of times people are afraid they're going to go off the deep end and completely change their lives. And I know some people are afraid to get into ceremony because what if I go crazy? What if I quit my life? What if I leave all these things? Um, and for me, I had those fears. And what I found is I don't want to leave all those things. I can deal with them better now. So I don't need to leave
Hmm.
my husband as my partner, and my kids don't seem to scream as much. But really, it's just me learning to have dealt with it better because I'm becoming my true self. I don't have all this extra anxiety and you know Madison Avenue things I'm trying to buy constantly.
Right.
That
You
makes
know,
sense.
this is advice I gave to somebody. This certainly isn't true advice for everyone, but it was for him. That he was really constantly worried about all losing things and things not working out and deals not going the way he thought they would, and um, just the tyranny of petty um, achievements is what I call it. And I said, hey man, if you lost everything you own, if you were completely homeless, lost your car, and lost everything you own in your life, how long would it take you to rebuild? It's like 6 months. All right, this isn't really much of a loss if you can rebuild it in 6 months, bud. Like let's quit worrying about the petty BS crap that you think you care about in your life. Because I assure you, nobody else cares. Like they don't care.
That is so true. Mike and I actually did an RV trip with the kids for a month a couple
Hmm.
years ago. And at the end of it, we loved it so much we didn't want it to end. And so we always say, well, we could live in our camper down by the river.
Hmm.
We'd
Yeah.
be okay with that. So what are we
Yeah.
afraid
Right.
of?
Yeah. And
That's
it's
cool.
that elegant life is realizing what your gifts are and like realizing where your strengths are, what makes you unique, what makes you special, that all of us do have that special little something to us. And that the more that we utilize that and revel in that, the more that we're, embracing our true nature and doing what we're here to do, that our calling is waiting for us. And I'm I'm a high achiever. You're a high achiever. Most of the people that we work with are trying to do some sort of achievement in their lives, And they worry about, well, if I get on this spiritual path, I'll just do nothing. And it's like, well, that's not true. Um, that one of the things that is true about us is that we have a big motor. There's a
Mhm.
big motor and it is always running.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter if you got it neutral or not, the motor's running. I talked to another friend about this that said, hey man, if you and I got put on a deserted island, for the first 3 or 4 days, we'd eat coconuts and drink fish, or, eat coconuts, eat fish, hang out on the beach and just chill out for about 4 days. I go, but around day four, we're going to get real sick of that. And I'm going to start stacking up rocks and just start building something. I don't know what I'm going to build yet, but I'm going to start stacking rocks because I need to stack rocks all day because that's what I need to do. I go,
Totally.
and you are going to start making music around day four because that's what you do. That's who you are. Like it doesn't matter if anybody else is around to hear it. Doesn't matter if anybody else is around to see it. That motor is running and you need to put it in gear. So like it is a false, that is a shadow belief of like, it's the same shadow belief of like, oh, I need to be harsh to myself or I won't keep trying and striving. It's like, well, that's not how that works at all. Like that's not even mildly true. That like if you relax, you'll actually end up doing more work that's probably better work because you're not concerned about the outcome. You're just having fun doing the thing.
Mm. I love that. I've never thought of it that way, but what a good perspective to just think, okay, if you were on a deserted island, what would you do?
Hmm.
You because yeah, you're right. Something is going to come up, and clearly that's your true self.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's
But that's one of
interesting.
the questions I ask, not all the time, but one of the questions I ask people sometimes before ceremony is like, what would you want in life if you could never show or tell anybody else?
Oh, wow.
Like, I want a BMW. All right, you can never show it or tell anybody that you have one. Is that still what you want? It's like, no. All right, well then that's not what you really want, is it?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm going to have to think about those. I'm going to have to use that. I love that. So, going back to breath work, you
Hmm.
created conscious connected breath work.
Hmm.
Can you explain to us what that is and how you came about that?
Okay. Conscious connected breath work is actually a kind of a general term for a physical type of breath work. And then I did a bunch of packaging around it holotropic breath work is a type of conscious connected breath work, somatic, DMT, breathing, rebirthing. A lot of those use a conscious connected breath in their breathwork practices. The breathwork practice that I came up with starts off with the intention, and that the intention is, what is your desire? What is your dream? Who do you need to be so that you can live your best life? And I'm really asking you, like, what is a good life for you? What is an elegant life? What's keeping you from having that good life? And then let's set an intention so that you can have that elegance in your life. And then from there, we do. It's very, the name really kind of the name is descriptive, in that you are going to consciously think about your breath. That you are going to actively think about your breath. And in the brain, the breath and your emotions are next door neighbors in the brain. That your emotional center and your breath center, they they're not the same, but they do touch and they do live right next door to each other in your brain. So your breathing does control your emotional state, and your emotional state controls your breathing. It goes both directions. That how you breathe is how you live. So you can change your lifestyle and your breath will change. Or you can change your breath and it'll change your lifestyle. I have found it far easier to change my breath and then have my lifestyle follow it than trying to brute force my lifestyle into doing something different. And then the next thing that we do is we connect the breath. That normally when we breathe, we inhale and we exhale and then we pause. And at the bottom of that pause, we cough, we swallow, we do whatever it is that we're going to do. That we have that pause. It happens so naturally that we never even notice it's there until somebody points it out and goes, "There's a pause in your breath right there," and they go, "Oh, there is. Never saw that." And all we're going to do is remove that pause. That one breath just transitions right into the next breath. That's like a wave that's rising and falling. the wave never stops. Like there's no start or stop in between one wave and the next. It just smoothly transitions right into the next one. Or a circle that's spinning, that the breath is the same way, that it never stops, it never starts. It just keeps that rhythm going. And I think this is definitely bro science. I don't have anything to back this up. But I think there's something that about when we connect those breaths, that it connects our body to our mind, and that connection in the breath creates that connection within us, and that once we have that connection within us, then there's a whole bunch of downstream emergent phenomenon that take place that lead to awareness. So Vipassana or other types of silent meditation, it may take like 3 years for you to achieve some sort of reliable awareness. Whereas with breath work, um, we offer a 2 hour experience, but certainly within the first 20 minutes, you're going to have a shift in your consciousness that you're going to become aware.
Oh yeah.
Um, and then one of the other things that we do with our breath work that's a little bit different is that at the end, everybody shares every time, that it's an act of vulnerability, and it's also an act of like reinforcing what your experience was. That if you are a very logical, naturalistic, humanistic person, it's very easy to discount the breathwork experience because it is very non-sequential. It's not built on logic. It's a weird place. Time gets weird in there, space gets weird in there, memories get weird in there. Like the whole it gets very like people are like, I don't know why I'm so emotional from breathing. And it's like, well, it's probably the first time your mind and your emotions talk to each other in the last 20 years. So,
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
emotions had some things to tell you.
That's so true. And I am a logical linear person, and I appreciate the sharing circle because it does help me to say, okay, I wasn't the only one that had a weird, crazy experience there. Or,
Mhm.
it really helps to solidify. Or you hear somebody else say something like, oh yeah, I did that too. I forgot,
Right.
and so it definitely does help to solidify that.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, people don't realize that we have a pause in our breath. Like most people don't realize how powerful just breathing can be.
Hmm.
Um, Last week we had my daughter's sister. So my kids are adopted, and their older sister and her best friend came to visit us for a couple weeks. And we went over to NASA, and there's a little ride that wouldn't scare most people, but my youngest daughter and their sister had panic attacks. Like they literally were crying. And then the ride was like, did this. I mean, it was NASA. It wasn't an amusement park. So they
Right.
were fine, but I was like, okay, ladies, we're going to talk about your breath.
Hmm.
So I did just a little tiny bit of breath work and introducing them to how, it can change your emotions and your entire state. And they were shocked. And I'm so glad that I'm able to introduce them to it at their young ages.
Hmm.
But I mean, I know you get this all the time where people are just like, what just happened? Because they're like, that was just from breathing,
Hmm. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, how often do you recommend that people do breath work?
I recommend that they do it like once a week. That the breathwork experience, when you begin breathwork, we like to say there's no right way to do breathwork, there's no wrong way to do breathwork, but there is more skillful and less skillful.
Hmm.
And that the more often you do it, the more skillful you'll become. And what happens is you do have the experience of awareness, like probably 149 out of 150 people have an experience of either deep meditation or awareness. Some of them have an experience of transcendence, but they have some sort of experience 149 out of 150. And then there's an afterglow that lasts 3 to 4 days after breath work, that they're just kind of in this peaceful, calm state of equanimity where things don't bother them. And it's always amazing how they think the rest of the world changed and not them. Like,
I think I said that earlier, didn't
yeah, like,
I?
hey, my husband's not as annoying anymore. And it's like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sure it's your husband that
He's so nice all of a sudden.
he completely changed, nothing to do with you. Um, for about 3 to 4 days, and then it starts to wear off. We start to go back to our normal habits. We start to do our normal things. You come back the next week, you do it again, and it bumps your awareness up, and that lasts 3 to 4 days. And what we've seen is that over a course of about 3 months, that it starts to last, the time period that it lasts lengthens until you get to the point about 3 months in. It's around 3 months that they just seem to be calm and peaceful all the time. That it lasts all 7 days, and you don't have that tapering off effect at the end. And that's just your new normal, is that state of being enlightened.
That's awesome. So I have a question about more skillful and less skillful
Hmm.
because so because of our experience together, you know me, I like to float in the ethers and I'm able to do a little bit of breath work and pop right out into the cosmos.
Hmm.
And I always think at the end, I don't think that was very skillful.
Hmm.
What is what is skillful?
So skillful is, one, when you first start doing breath work, it probably takes about 20 to 30 minutes before you feel that shift in consciousness, that you feel that energy shift, that you shift from like everyday life into this liminal space or into a transcendent space or a meditative space. Those are kind of the three different places you can go. And that, so it takes about 20 minutes to do that. Well, as you become more skillful, that time frame shortens. It takes me about 3 breaths for me to drop in anymore. That when I do it, up until about 2 months ago, Kim, my partner, thought I was just like being overly bright. She's like, "There's no way that's humanly possible." And then she's like, "Oh, I did 3 breaths and dropped in." And I'm like, "Yeah, and you're been doing it for about 2.5 years, huh?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Right on track. That is when that happens." Um, so that is one sign of skillfulness, is like how quickly can you get into that meditative transcendent space doing breath work. That's one sign of it. At the beginning of my breath work journey, the skillfulness that I found was that on the inhale, we focus all our effort, all of our energy, all of our work is on the inhale. And then on the exhale, we just relax. And as you're relaxing, it's a bit like the ringing of a bell. That when a bell rings, when does the sound stop? That it's a tapering off and it's a fading away. And the same thing happens with your exhale. And that I was trying to figure out, or I was trying to sense, when does my exhale end and when does my inhale need to begin? Because I'm just relaxing into it. And is it continuing to go very slowly? And when do I get it in? And finding that transition period so that it would continue like a flywheel. So what you want is the breath to that it's going to generate its own power at some point, that you're not going to be forcing it, that it just happens. So trying to consciously find that place where this breath has ended and the next one has begun. Like on the inhale, it's pretty easy. Like I'm full. I'm
Mm.
done. This is all the air I can take. And then you just relax and let go. And then as you get ready for the inhale, it's for me, that took a lot of skill to figure out when to do that. Other people, they get caught up in the mechanics and the like, how long should the, like, how many seconds should the inhale be, how many seconds should the exhale be, how deep should it be, how much should be involved, should it be through my nose, should it be through my mouth, should it be like this, should it be like that? And all of those, in the beginning, I'll tell you what to do. um, but eventually what we're looking for is, again, that flywheel effect takes over. That in the beginning, it's going to take you 20 minutes to drop in. And then once you drop in, you're probably going to consciously breathe your breath for about 20 minutes more. And then at a certain point, you're not consciously breathing anymore. And the breath just takes over, and you'll be breathing deeply and fully. And sometimes it's rapid, and sometimes it's slow, but your breath is now breathing you. And that is probably the most skillful, is like, how quickly can you drop in and how quickly can you get your breath to breathe you instead of you breathing your breath and worrying about, am I doing this right? Is this the right speed? Is it deep enough? Is it long enough? Should I breathe faster? Should I breathe slower? It's like, it doesn't matter.
Well, that makes me feel better because I think I've been in that place before, but sometimes I hear people that are doing, the fast, the faster in and out the whole entire time. And I'm like, wow, that that's a lot of effort. I think I did that twice, you know?
Hmm.
And so what you're saying is you don't need to necessarily do that in order to have the peak experience
Hmm.
and get the benefits. Good.
Yeah. So you'll one of the other things we often say is how you breathe is how you live, and how you live is how you breathe. So my partner Kim, she's very much a human hummingbird, and that she's like
Mhm.
jump, 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 jump all the time, just doing all the things very, very rapid. Well, when she does breath work, it's like this. And like if I did that for 5 minutes, I would be, it I can't do that. I can't I
Yeah.
can't maintain that level of speed. Um, hopefully you can tell by my voice and how I'm a lot slower, I'm a lot more methodical. So when I breathe, and that's what I do for the whole hour because that's who I am as a human being. Now, every once in a while, I got some stuff to work out, and like when it takes over and does it on its own, I may be taking deep, shallow, fast breaths because whatever's going on inside of me emotionally, mentally, that needs to work out. But that's not my default state. It's not my standard state mentally or emotionally. And that once you find that default state, it's going to mimic you.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what's the right way to be me? And it's like, yeah, do that.
Yeah. Going back to that word elegant,
Hmm. Yeah.
be who you are. Just
Yeah.
allow it to happen, right?
Yeah. That when you see people being who they are, like it is so easy. Like they will do things that they're like, oh yeah, that didn't take any effort at all. And you're like, if I practiced the rest of my life, I could never do that.
Mhm.
And it's super simple, super easy, beautiful for them because that's who they are, that they can have that elegance. And the closer that you can get yourself to living your gifts, it seems ridiculously easy and simple when you do it. You're like, well, that was easy. Why should you pay me for that? And it's like, because it
Yeah.
was easy for you.
Yes. I've had that experience. Why would you pay me for that?
Right.
And people are like, I want to pay you for that. Like,
Right.
okay.
Because because I can't do that. That's why.
Yeah, yeah, it's so true. If everybody was living from that place, also, we would be allowing one another to live from their place more because
Hmm.
all of a sudden, when you're in that zone, when you're connected and you're flowing and it feels easy, you don't have the same jealousies or the
Hmm.
same, expectations of other people.
Right.
It's almost like when it's lifted off of you, it transfers to everybody. So
Yeah.
I always say, Jake, that I wish every single person in the world would do breath work and a plant medicine ceremony,
Right.
ayahuasca or mushrooms, or really DMT.
Right. It is I think breath work is a great place for everyone to start.
Yeah,
Um there are a lot of people that the truth is a powerful thing,
yeah.
and not everybody's always ready for it. But sometimes little little bite-sized portions of the truth are a lot easier to start with.
That's so true. Well, and the truth, but I think also, like we were discussing off camera, there's a lot of people who are just nervous, period, about exploring anything,
Hmm.
whether that's because of they're afraid of the truth or they don't even have an inkling of what the truth is. They're just afraid of anything that's outside of their norm. Breath work is a great place to start because again, it's just your breath and
Hmm.
you can control it,
Yeah,
you know.
it's one of those things where they've gotten a lot of conditioning, that they've recently had a conversation with somebody that I'm gonna go anti-vax here for a second.
That's fine.
That that was like questioning me about being out in the sun, and like clearly if you look at my hair and skin, I'm not from a people of the sun, but sunshine is absolutely positively good for you. But if you listen to the mainstream narrative, like, hey, whatever you do, don't get in the sun, it'll kill you, it'll give you cancer. And meanwhile, it's like, well, if you actually get in the sun, get some in your in your eyes early in the morning, it's better for you. And they were debating me about that. I was like, well, so like since this COVID thing, you've seen that almost every piece of health advice they've given you is not only wrong, but like completely wrong. Like they're trying to make you unhealthy. And you realize that in this one, it's amazing how they can realize things in one small area and go, hey, everything that they told us about COVID was wrong. And not just mildly wrong, but like tragically wrong. And don't realize like, hey, that's the same people telling you not to get sunshine.
Yeah.
uh, maybe maybe question that as well. So I think there is a lot of questioning of the narrative that is starting to happen. Um, and it will seep out slowly from the one little seed that gets planted where they see like, oh, that wasn't even kind of correct,
Yeah.
and start to question other areas.
Yeah. That's what led me to here to doing this podcast, Jake. I started questioning maybe, gosh, it's been probably over a decade that I've really been questioning. And you know, like you said, anti-vax, we don't vaccinate. We didn't
Hmm.
COVID shot. We, go out in the sun with no sunscreen all the time. We live in
Hmm.
Florida now and we're always outside with no sunscreen. And we've never felt healthier and more
Right.
amazing. And but it led me to doing this podcast because I know there's other people out there just beginning their journey of going, oh, what the hell? Like,
Right.
like that, that COVID thing didn't go so well. So maybe we should start looking at other stuff, or maybe they start with food or,
Hmm.
you know,
Hey,
as
eat 7 servings of grain a day. Like, hey,
yeah,
that's going to give you like, make you obese and give you brain disease, but
yeah.
that's good for us. Uh,
Yeah, or dairy. My kids really believe that they should have ice cream every day still. We're working on that
your kids may have a leg to stand with me on that one. They're like, hey, all right, give
one.
me your best pitch. I'll probably buy it.
Well, there's something to be said. I actually saw a study that was done where they gave the participants two different types of smoothie, and one of them was no, they gave them the same type of smoothie, but they told one group that it was terrible for them and it was
Mhm.
ice cream and all of that, and they told the other group that it was fruit and
It's
protein
protein
and
shake.
super healthy for you,
Yeah.
and their bodies responded according to what they told them, not
Hmm.
what was the truth about what was in it. And so
Hmm.
I was always telling my kids, ice cream's so bad for you. And now I'm like, oh, sure, have fun. Like
Right. Right.
it's gonna be worse for them if I keep telling them how bad it is. So,
Right.
but that is interesting. Um, if we want to go down this little rabbit trail for a second. So
Sure.
you are a shaman.
Hmm.
And so you have told me before that you see energy, like you see people's energy more than you recognize necessarily features about them sometimes.
Hmm.
So so do you see other things? Like, do you also see what is coming for our world? Or I have so many questions.
Um, for that, uh, there's a lot of different titles that are wrapped up in that there's prophets, seers, revelators, shamans. As a shaman, your job is to you are either reconnecting energy within somebody that they've lost contact with. So they've got a fractured psyche somehow, and you're reconnecting that. That is one aspect of the job. The other aspect of the job is that you're removing energy that is attached to them that is not theirs. Uh, Mom, dad, society, culture, church, whoever it is, has given them a belief or a burden to carry that is not their own, and then you just remove that from them. That is, as a shaman, that's all you do. There may be other, we all facilitate that differently.
Mhm.
That we all, everyone who's doing a shamanic practice is doing that, and they're doing it through different methods. Now, what you were asking for is that there's prophets, seers, and revelators. Prophets are usually somebody who's working with a group of people in the current now, and saying that the future doesn't look good and you need to repent. That is generally what prophets do is that they are working with people in this moment and trying to change the cores of the present. Seers are generally people who see the future and are trying to work with those people. Like, hey, this is what's going to happen in your time. Heads up, you should do something about this when it shows up. And then the revelators are also working with the future, and they're just kind of like, hey, this is what's coming. Do with it what you want. Not my problem. Figure it out. And those are kind of the three categories that people are working with in there. Um, they're never giving you good news.
Yeah, right.
They,
Never.
they they never show up with winning lottery numbers. Like, hey, let me tell you how I can make your life better. That's I
Dang
recently had
it.
yeah um recently had someone who was like, I want to talk to God, and I'm like, well. I can arrange that conversation. And they're like, you coming with me? I'm like, oh, definitely not. Definitely not. Like you're you're on your own once you get into the room, but I'll be outside waiting, smoking a cigarette while you have that conversation. Um, that everybody thinks they want to talk to the divine until they actually do. And then they're like, oh, that didn't go nearly as splendidly as I thought it would. Um, so I try to keep those conversations as few and far between as possible.
Yeah.
Because it generally is like let me tell you some things about you that you don't know about you. And it's a
Yeah.
pretty difficult do better conversation.
Yeah. Well, that's probably why we're here, to learn to do better. But
Correct.
so a lot of our audience is, a lot of my audience is people who are beginning, like they're seekers, they're interested in this stuff. And I feel like my job is to make it, not as daunting, not as scary,
Hmm.
make it more normal. And I think a lot of times when people are beginning on that journey is sometimes catalyzed by something like, they realize that the information they were given about the COVID shot was bad. And so they are starting to go, what else is happening? Or they are in a place in their life where they're just like pretty depressed because they feel like there has to be more to life than this,
Hmm.
this feeling that they're having. And so I think a lot of times people start from kind of this bad place where they're
Hmm.
like, oh my gosh, everything that I thought was real isn't real. And it does lead down those scary rabbit holes. Like, they're lying to us about food, they're lying to us about this. And I think though what you do and what you work with, like helping people connect those broken parts of themselves and come back to that elegant life, makes all the rest of it not so scary.
Hmm.
Do you agree with that?
I do. That um, a lot of people like to use the analogy of life as climbing a mountain, and I don't really like that analogy. It does kind of imply that the view is always improving, but it also implies that there's like a peak. Like, hey, I'm going to get to the top and I'm going to be done. And I remember somebody like early on, they're like, "Am I done?" And I was like, "No, I've been doing this 5 years longer than you have, and I'm nowhere near done. Like, it's not even remarkably close." I do like to think of it more as a song or a dance. That
Mm,
like that life is a symphony, and the point of playing in the symphony isn't to get to the end of the song. It's to play your part the best way possible. That like, hey, sometimes you're going to be out of tune. Sometimes you're going to be, out of rhythm. And sometimes maybe you're not going to play that skillfully. But like the more skillfully that you play and the more that you're in harmony with the rest of life, the more beautiful the song's going to be. And
mm,
that like when you are when you are at your most skillful is probably when you're using your least amount of effort.
mm. That's true. I actually was in the symphony, and that was true then too.
Mhm.
When you're in the flow, it comes out beautifully. And when you're like, what note am I on? Everything's
Right.
not it's harder, right?
Mhm.
But so do you ever wonder what is the point of all of it. Why did God create the whole thing in the beginning? Like
Hmm.
you've probably heard this from me. I have had moments where I'm like, what the holy fuck? Like no offense to the creator, but
Hmm.
what the fuck were you thinking? Why? Like,
Hmm.
why create it in the first place?
What is the longest period that you have sustained bliss?
Hmm. Well, probably in ceremony.
Okay.
So for,
And and
or
and maybe post ceremony a couple
yeah,
days where you just like
yeah,
blissed
for
out.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it gets boring.
Uh, I could do it a couple more days.
You could probably do it a couple more days, but there's also that point like day 4 or 5 of sustained bliss. You're like, okay, we got to we got to make some shit happen around here. Like this straight line experience is not that enjoyable. We need that wave. We need that up. We need that down. We need those peaks. We need those valleys. Um, and I really don't think, on the one hand, there's a difference between meaning and purpose. And I do not think that there is a meaning to life. And meaning is inherent. That
Mhm,
that meaning, you can't separate meaning from the thing. So like the word pontificate means to preach or to sermonize, and that you can't separate the meaning of the word from the word. That those two things are interlinked. They can't be separated. But when you use like, hey, what I'm doing right now is pontificating to you about the meaning of life, that word now has a purpose, and the purpose is how you use it. So there's no meaning to your life, but your life does have purpose, and you get to choose what that purpose is. And
mhm,
you get to choose like how that, just because you have a group of talents that you can put together, it's called a talent stack, that like, hey, I'm a good communicator, I'm good at real estate, I'm good at explaining difficult concepts easily, I'm good at all these things. That means I have to do this one thing, and that's my life purpose. No, no, there's probably an infinite variety of ways that you can implement that talent stack and still be living your purpose, and that's your choice. That you have that choice of how you're doing that. Recently, I've started to amend my belief that there's no meaning to life. That I think, if there is a meaning to life, and I'm not sold on this yet, the meaning to life is to be better at playing the game. That's all there is to it. You're just here to get better at playing the game,
I
and life is the game.
I think that's where my question comes, like, why? Why do I have to play the game? You know what I mean? Like
Because
I
you're
get
going to be
mad
bored
my
otherwise.
I know that's true. That's probably true. So I think that must be true because, we've talked about, I actually remember choosing this life and I was so excited about it. We don't have a
Hmm.
word for it. We don't have a word. I don't think we even have a feeling here of how
Hmm.
excited and sure I was. And that's actually what started me on my journey of plant medicine was I
Hmm.
wanted to see that, I wanted to experience that feeling again or see if it was real. And so I think you're probably right. I think I was like, okay, done with this. Let's go have a little craziness. Let's go see.
Right.
We can shake shit up for a while.
Right. We've got to do something different. Like it's,
Yeah.
if you're just winning all the time, it gets boring.
Yeah. Wow. Do you ever do you ever think, there's as above, so below.
Hmm.
And I've, I, so we're kind of getting off track of what the point of this was going to be, but I figured we would, and maybe this will turn into a couple podcast
Right.
episodes. But do you ever wonder what if we're all just cells in like one body,
Uh-huh.
whole other universe?
What if we're a virtual reality? Like
So that's my
that
next.
that could be one. We could be individual cells in a body, that like panpsychism says that that's entirely viable.
Mhm.
That like we could be a cell, we could be an atom. That like, hey, do the red blood cells within our body have free will? Probably.
Yeah.
They don't realize that they're confined just to the arteries, but like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. It's pumping that way. And, they're looking forward to like picking up some oxygen, going down the road, dropping off some oxygen, and then doing the whole thing again, for all we know.
Mhm.
Um, that's not out of the question. But there's
So,
also like the virtual reality where,
yeah,
let's see what his name. His name's not Bill Gates, Jeff Gates.
Elon.
He's a physicist named Gates.
uh,
I'll remember his name as soon as I'm done telling the story. But he's a theoretical physicist working at the quantum level, and he was working on math for error code correction at the quantum level. And what he came up with was the same exact mathematical formula that our browsers use for error correction. So he's studying the smallest elements of the universe and how they would correct code, and came up with the exact same math that we already use to correct code in browsers. And that was kind of like, all right, well, that's enough math for today. Not going to be mathing anymore, because this points to like all of reality is this is just a presentation level of something that's going on underneath, and that it's all a virtual reality.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
When I first heard that, it offended me so bad because I was very in my belief of Christianity at and my beliefs are not defined now because I just have so many questions. Like
Right.
there's so much to learn. But when I first heard that, I was like, that is ridiculous. There's no way. And the more that I've studied quantum physics and some of the things that we share with one another, sacred geometry and so forth, I'm like, of course it actually is. Like this
Right.
all makes sense. It doesn't erase there being a creator, you
Hmm.
know. Um
Well, it also doesn't. It's like, well, is this experience real? And it's
yes,
like, well, does it hurt?
it does
I think
hurt.
I think that's about as real as it gets.
Yeah, so it's real for us, right? I heard
Hmm.
somebody just yesterday say that there's three levels basically to it. And the first
Hmm.
is like you're playing it, you're the avatar, you're in it and you don't realize that there's anything else. And the second level is that you realize you become the observer of the avatar. So you realize that there's something else and you're playing it. And then the third level is you become the coder.
Hmm.
So just one more level, you realize that if this is a game, nothing has an inherent meaning. It's
Hmm.
we attach meaning to it. And because there isn't an inherent meaning, and they have proven that particles can be either waves or
Hmm.
correct me, waves or
They can be
solid.
a wave and a particle. They
So
they're
waves
a
and
wave,
atoms.
and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
they're a wave until they're observed, and then they become a
And then they're a
particle.
part, yeah.
Yeah.
So observe something different and change your reality.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so then that goes back to, do you remember when the movie The Secret came out? That's probably
Hmm.
been 20 years. And I was, oh my gosh, this is, I got kind of into that. And then the real estate market crashed. And no matter what I did, or no matter how I thought I was manifesting, I couldn't change that.
Right.
Um, and that got, I don't know, that really affected me at the time. And now I can look back and realize how led, it all led to the greatest things. Like sometimes you can't control things that are happening at a mass evolution world level. You can just control how you'd respond to it,
Hmm.
how you feel about it. And by doing that, you change your reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is, the as I like to say, that the crazy person and the mystic are swimming in the same water.
Yeah, they're just so Yeah. There's a movie on Gaia that talks about that. Like, are you crazy or are you enlightened? And
Hmm.
I've wondered that sometimes.
Hmm. Well, it is. I mean, if you've never questioned yourself that you're crazy, you're probably crazy. If you have questioned yourself, you're probably not. But the joke that we always have is like the difference between the mystic and the crazy person is the mystic knows who to talk to.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Well, the crazy person is just jabbering to everybody. You're like, hey man, read the room.
Yeah. Well, and what I kind of think now is like the mystic is I imagine a river. Like the mystic has learned to flow with the river, and the crazy person is trying to control it and move
Hmm.
upstream and grab it all for themselves, instead of
Right.
just letting go. And that so I feel like I
That's
was
a
crazy
hmm.
before, you know,
Right.
and
Right.
now I'm learning to just be in the flow, and it's so much more comfortable.
Right. Yeah.
So as you can see.
I'm probably gonna borrow that.
Oh, you can. Thanks. But as you can see, like my mind goes into all of these different areas. And like in one ceremony that we were in, I had a moment where God showed me, like God told me really clearly, if you would stop focusing on all these little trivial issues, like that you make them such a big deal and it's just a human problem, like you can see that life is so much greater. And it was like that space between, like if you can take your focus off of this one little thing and allow that breath in there, allow space in there, allow God in there, then all of a sudden it's not such a big issue. And you can
Hmm.
see all of life instead of the one issue. Incredible lesson. And then what happened was he was like, by the way, this is just one level. Then there's this whole other world above that and a whole and it was like 7 levels. And I was like, what?
Hmm.
Like, oh my gosh, why? Why is there so much to it? And so that kind of
Because
set me
you get bored.
on. Yes, okay.
It's
Because
like,
it
all
is
right,
intimidating.
I mastered this level. All right,
When
great.
I
Now master the next one.
well, when I was little, I used to ask my grandma, like, what happens when you die? And grandma would say, well, you go into heaven and you live for forever. And I was like, why? I don't want
Hmm.
to. What if you don't want to live forever? How boring would that get? And she would always be like, well, I don't think it's quite the same as is here. I'm like, oh,
Right.
maybe it is. And God just keeps creating other games for us to play. But as you can see, I like to bounce around and go all I think when I first started scuba diving, I was so scared to do it. And then once I realized it's like this whole other world down there, I was like the one that was like upside down and like looking behind the rock or following the shark. And
Right.
I feel like I do that in ceremony. Like you've had to bring me back a couple times because I
Hmm.
was going to follow the shark or whatever. So how explain that? Like how do you what is a safe space or a safe container? And how do you do that?
Okay.
And why do you need to do that? Why can't I just go?
Hmm. All right. That is a pretty expensive question. Um, so whenever you are doing work, that is in a non-ordinary state, let's call it that. Breath work is definitely a non-ordinary state. It's a peak state. I like to call it a transcendent space, in which the cares and worries of the everyday world kind of evaporate. You're not worried about yourself as an individual anymore, that you become part of the whole. And that in making that transition from you are Jeri to now I'm the transcendent being of light who is part of everything. Um, as a facilitator, when you are holding space, what you're doing is creating a container. And that container can take on a lot of different shapes, can take on a lot of different forms. Different facilitators have different analogies for the container that they create. I had one facilitator I worked with who said that the container he created was a tornado. And I was like, well, that is remarkably upsetting.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, well, as long as you're in the eye of the storm, it's pretty cool. I was like, all right, I can see that.
Okay.
Um, so I like to think of it as a bowl or as it can be a cocoon. It can be an airtight spaceship. Um, I like to think of mine as a field of play, that I'm creating this enormous space that is darker on the edges. And as long as you stay in the middle of the field, which is still enormous, there's a lot of area for you to work, that you can do whatever you want within inside of that. It's like almost like a Montessori school, where it's like, hey, here's all the stuff, whatever you want to do, you can do that. I'm not going to tell you what to do. This is your journey. This is your trip. This is up to you. I'll help guide you if you want to figure out how to go somewhere, but like, I'm not going to tell you where you need to go. That's not my job. So the way that you create that container is through your own awareness, that you have to be self-aware, and that is your self-awareness that creates that container that you then give to the other person as a gift, as a model, and as an example of, this is what awareness looks like, and now you too can experience awareness. With that said, there are limits to the edges of it. I know, we unfortunately get to hear people frequently who try and think psychedelics are a do-it-yourself project, which is a terrible idea.
Mhm.
It works out occasionally, but most of the time it doesn't. Where they will like, I just thought I would take a bunch of mushrooms and sit at home, and you know, was talking to somebody who was on a camping trip, and they were like, yeah, I had to lock myself into my car because all I wanted to think about was throwing myself off this cliff that was at the edge of the campground the whole time. Why'd that happen? And it's like, well, because you didn't have anybody holding space for you that wouldn't allow that to not happen. That part of that awareness is that when you're trying to go to that, I'm just going to call it stupid place of like, I'm going to throw myself into the fire. I'm going to throw myself off to the off the cliff, or whatever self-destructive impulse that's showing up. My job as a facilitator is to completely negate that, that option, that avenue, that place that you're trying to go does not exist because of the container I created. Um, and I think there are definitely skill levels in facilitators, and not all of some of them create very small, narrow spaces that allow a very specific level of work to be done, but they're not very expansive. They're only there to help you heal one thing, which can be helpful if that's the issue that you have. But I've also seen facilitators who like negate people's experiences because their experience was like, hey, I just want people to experience love and joy and happiness start to finish, and there's not going to be one negative emotion the entire time, which is also tremendously unhelpful. Like, you
Yeah.
need to be in touch with your shadow in order to experience it and accept it, and uh, not be off-putting with it, so that you can embrace your own shadow. So that is part of that, is like what it takes to create um, a container, is that you have to be aware that if you have enormous blind spots, if you have enormous areas where you're not aware, then the container you create is going to have enormous holes in it as well.
Mhm. You mentioned the shadow. I heard recently, or I read recently in a NLP, or neuro linguistic programming book that I
Hmm.
read about. I just heard it. It just described the shadow differently, because a lot of people are talking about shadow work,
Hmm.
in this arena, and I think shadow is always looked at as the bad side, or the negative, or the part you don't want to be like.
Hmm.
But this book said that your shadow was created when your good was created, because
Hmm.
if when something's created, its equal and opposite has to
Hmm.
also be created. And so if you think you're light, you also have this dark shadow that was created at the same time, and they do the same purpose in your life, which is to protect you and move you forward in your life. They just do it differently.
Hmm.
And just the way it was said just kind of struck me. I was like, oh, what am I afraid of? Like, when I have met that shadow side, I always feel more comfortable.
Hmm.
Like, I feel so much more integrated and safe after going there. So
Yeah.
that's interesting.
Yeah, that's one of the ways that is very similar to what you've just said. The way I explain the shadow is that your gift is your shadow is your gift. The reason that people love you is also that it's the exact same reason they hate you. Hey, if
Mm.
you could take 20% off the top of your gift, which you're over relying on, you're driving me up the wall with your freaking gift is basically what's happening. And that becomes your shadow. Your shadow isn't like some long lost thing, but it can also be, um, people often assume that their shadow is toxic, that somehow toxic and shadow have become the same thing, and they're not. You can have you can have toxic positivity. I've seen a bunch of that in my life. There's a bunch of that in the spiritual world that, your shadow can be, it can also be very endearing to people, even though you're ashamed of it. uh, I grew up being a fighter and just wanted to be a tough guy my whole life, and it turns out I'm super goofy, and I tried to hide that goofiness for years, that I was actually just like a goofy dude. And once I was just like, oh, I'll just relax and be goofy, I was like, oh yeah, that's okay. I've got another friend who's basically a narcissist, and you think, oh, that's bad, that's terrible. But he accepts it completely, and it actually ends up being endearing. That me and a friend were having a conversation, and he came out and just stood there on the edge of our conversation for 5 minutes, like doing his little thing. He's like, all the time, and I'm finally like, what do you need, Tom? And he's like, I just got this shirt on Amazon and I wanted you guys to see it. And I was like, it's really it's a really nice shirt, Tom. And he's like, all right, thanks. And then he wandered off and went back to his office. And it was like, all right, one, guy's a complete narcissist. Two, it's super endearing. Like, hey, I just came right out and said I need attention for you for my shirt. That's a cute
Yep.
shirt. Okay, now I can go back to work. And it's simple and easy.
Wow, that's awesome. Well, and I can relate to that too. I would have, my shadow side, I always felt like was the side that I ran from because, that's the part that was abused and then acted out, drugs and alcohol and promiscuity and all the stuff. But when I started like just being honest about it,
Hmm.
and showing it to everyone instead of trying to hide it, like, yeah, this is what I did and I'm not proud of it. That is what, like, that became my calling,
Hmm.
like that became my light that people saw, like, oh, she
Hmm.
went through this and she can talk about it. I want to be like that, you
Right.
know and so that's where I found my people, and that's where my greatest help to the world comes from. So
Right.
that's interesting. Going back to the safe space, I have heard stories in, of course, ceremony, but even also
Hmm.
in breath work
Hmm.
where facilitators were not totally on the up and up,
Hmm.
and, holding a safe space, even from them physically, was
Hmm.
an issue. And how do people find because you're in Arizona, you're in
Hmm.
Phoenix, and I love going to breathwork there. You also offer it online, which is amazing. But if somebody wants to find something in their local area, if they're not able to go, how do you know if it's safe or not?
Um, get a referral, trust your gut. Um, Personally, I won't meet with female clients alone anymore. That, I've heard stories from both sides of this, so I want to be very clear. I'm not making excuses, and I'm not making somebody something that they're not.
Mhm.
At ceremony, I've been assaulted by women no less than 12 times. I've been grabbed, groped, had my pants tried to take my pants off in the middle of ceremony, which seems a little aggressive, but
Not aggressive.
yeah, it's aggressive. Um, I've had women disrobe. Uh, that's pretty frequently. I've had women pleasure themselves, and so like as a normal person, nobody teaches guys how to say no.
Mm,
Like
that's
the number of guys that get hit on in their life is vanishingly small. Like if a woman sees me walking down the street, I've never been hit on in my life. Like it's like women aren't just coming up and going, hey, how you doing? So to be in that space and have a woman like, I'm going to take your pants off you, in one sense, is very flattering. Like if you're just a normal guy, you're like, well, that's never happened before. um and it does take a tremendous amount of effort to go, she's processing trauma.
Mhm.
She is not attracted to you as a person. She's working through something there. Um, so I've heard stories of women going, yeah, this, and and then the shaman was molesting me, and I was like, I I would bet $100 if there was an outside observer, you initiated it, and he didn't know how to handle it properly. That said, he didn't handle it properly,
Mhm.
and that it does take, as a dude, it takes a lot of effort. As a shaman, it's pretty easy. But it's like, what state are you in when it's happening? That like, oh, I can see the eternal reality of what's happening here, and I can deal with it easily. Versus like, oh, I just happen to be a guy right now, and this isn't so easy to deal with. So that is the professional risk that is out there, um, as a male facilitator. Uh, and again, that's why I refuse to work with females alone.
Yeah.
But like someone's like, hey, we need to work together. And it's like, well, let me see who else I can get to sit here with me, because there are no conditions that I'm going to allow this to happen in which there's not a sober witness.
Yeah.
Could be a female, could be another dude. I don't care, but somebody has to be here.
Yeah.
As much for your protection as mine.
It's probably also a good idea for somebody, especially when they're, well, maybe always for women to take a friend.
Hmm. Absolutely.
And I would be wary of anyone doing any type of ceremony that said your friend can't come, you know?
Yeah.
If
And I've had other, there's a facilitator that I know who only works with people individually, one on one, no one else in the room. And there is you know, there's a level of vulnerability that people need to have when they're doing the work. Um, and I can see why you would want that, but I wouldn't demand it. Um, I'm more with you, like, hey, bring a friend.
yeah,
It'll be
yeah.
better for everybody.
Well,
And as far as like finding out, it's like, hey, who's a good mechanic? Um,
yeah,
get a referral, get a
yeah.
friend.
That's a
That
great point.
it's always tough to tell. And the best ones doing a lot of probably
Uh,
not doing a lot of outreach. Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I think that getting a referral and taking a friend are two really great points. And because I mean, this is different. You are transcending your normal self and your normal conscious mind. And there have been times where I'm like, the first person I went with was my friend Shauna. And there was times where I'm like, I trust Shauna, I trust Shauna, like this
Right.
this is not as bad as it seems right now. She would never have led me here,
Right.
and I think that's important. Not everybody has that experience, but I've needed it, more than twice. I just
Right.
what I want to speak to the creative director here. I don't know what's going on in my mind right now, and I don't like it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what gets me through. And I cannot imagine starting this path solo.
Hmm.
It wouldn't have worked out well, probably for me. So,
Right.
but that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on to introduce you. I think so that people can see like this path. It's not scary. It's like the best people to work with are very like, grounded and emotionally stable and not crazy and just there's so much good that can come when you if you're being called, when you trust the calling and move forward in a safe and environment.
Hmm. And
So
if you um I've seen people show up to ceremonies and they didn't feel safe and like packed up their stuff and left. And I 100% support that.
yeah,
That like listen to your gut. Even if, well, even if your is wrong, like what's the harm? You maybe
yeah,
lose some money, maybe lose a deposit. It's certainly less expensive than being tragically wrong.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that can happen. I just saw a post a couple days ago here in Florida where I live about somebody who's doing bufo or 5-meo DMT that it is, they said it was two people, a male and a female, and that they were both crossing the line.
Hmm.
And this person had firsthand experience and witnessed it. So it does happen, and it's just
Hmm.
super important that you trust your gut. That's a big one. Trust your
It
gut. So many of us don't trust our guts right now.
it is a big one, and like, our not just our society, but people in general, they give somebody an authority like, hey, you're in this position of authority, so therefore I trust you, and then it's easier for them to abuse that trust. Um, that was actually a difficult moment, more than a difficult moment. It was a difficult period for me, and that my partner was like, well, with the position you hold, and I was like, there's no position I hold. I made this up. Like, I made all of this up. Like, I found this thing that was cool, and then I made up a bunch of stuff, and then other people wanted to do it with me. There's no position. And she was like, I don't think you realize what's happening here. And it probably
Yeah.
took me for a year and go, oh, I do hold position. I do have to behave a certain way. I can't act like a Yahoo. But
Well, sometimes you can, but not all the time.
right. Yeah, it's like, hey, you've got to recognize like what you're doing here. And it is difficult when there's not a long-standing tradition of like, oh, I guess I do have some sort of authority here that I need to honor. Um, and it is early on in this, it would entertain me when people were like, well, what's your credentials? What's your certification? I'm like, well, I didn't exactly go down to the community college and get an associate's in shamanism. That's not how this works.
Yeah, but you did have training from
Yeah.
shamans who
Yeah, I
have it.
did. I did a lot of work, but it's more of an apprenticeship in that, like, anytime you do an apprenticeship, you never really recognize when you're ready. You're just like, you're a step and fetch kid for a long time. Like, hey, go get me the rattle, go get me this, go do other stuff, and you're just like hanging out. Like, I don't know. I guess I'm learning something, and it isn't until years later you're like, it's like Mr. Miyagi paint the fence, where you go, oh, I guess there was a purpose to that, and I was learning something at the time that I didn't recognize that was there. That I always joke about the facilitators that I worked with. Um, every every time I would ask a question, their answer was always listen to spirit, and I was always very frustrated with that answer because I'm like, hey, why do I use the rattle as opposed to the drum? Like, why would I use one versus the other? And they're like, listen to spirit. I'm like, that is a terrible answer. Does spirit have a manual or a guide, or like, is there something I can read? No, just listen to spirit. And it turns out that is really good advice because you know, you do have to be in touch with something greater than yourself. That I've seen people who are spiritually tone deaf but want to be facilitators, and it is tremendously difficult because they're like, I'm getting it, and it's like, you can't hear the music. Like, you don't see the harmony that's happening here. You're constantly out of step. So just learning to hear that, learning to sense it, learning to feel it, so that you can do the work when you need to do the work, and not when you don't.
Yeah, that's cool. That's another point that people ask me a lot when I talk to them about ceremony or when I've introduced them to, you know,
Hmm.
that sort of thing is, well, are they going to help me? Are they
Hmm.
going to help me? And I'm like, well, only if you really need it, because if they help you the whole time, then what work did you do? And you're just going to
Right.
have to come back.
Hmm.
And people always get that. They're like, yeah,
Hmm.
there's a reason I want to do this.
Hmm.
Like if he does all the work for you,
Hmm.
then what was the point of you being there? So
What is like being a good personal trainer? And like, I'm not going to do your push-ups for you. Um, and it is, one of the ways that I've talked about, like, the difference between doing breath work with the YouTube video and doing breath work like with us at one of our sessions is like it's the difference between just going to the gym and working out and going to the gym and having a trainer there with you. That like I'm I was a fairly accomplished athlete and I still work out harder and do a better job when I've got a trainer there with a clipboard and a timer going, let's, hop, 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 hop.
Mm.
So it matters for the end result.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, I'm grateful for the space that you hold and all the things that you do.
Thanks.
Yeah,
You're welcome.
really, I mean that from the bottom
You've
of my I love you, man.
you've been a lot of fun for a lot of years. You are, if nothing else, you have been entertaining.
What I'm here for.
Right.
Um, so I have two questions for you. First one,
Sure.
what is one book that you recommend that all of our listeners read? Secondly, what is one thing that you wish the entire world knew?
Um, the book would be Awareness by Anthony DeMello. Um, I recommend it to everybody before they come to ceremony. And usually when they get done reading it, they're like, what else you got? And I'm like, that's it. That's
Read it
read it again. Read it again.
again.
And it's a fairly short book. If you read it cover to cover, it doesn't take very long. It's broken up into really short chapters where it talks about awareness, and you can chapters anywhere from 2 minutes to 5 minutes. So you can get up every morning, read one chapter. Whenever I am involved in that practice where I read awareness every morning, like every morning, it's like, how could this chapter be the perfect chapter for this day? And every time it is the perfect chapter for that day. Um,
I've
it
also
is.
listened to the book and I love
Mhm.
listening to him. He's funny.
He is. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's a Jesuit priest who's also a psychologist and a therapist, and from India. So he's got a background in Hindu yoga, Catholicism, modern psychotherapy, and kind of weaves it all together into um, this lecture that he gave at a retreat about awareness, and that became the book. So it's phenomenal. That would be the book I'd recommend. And then
One
um,
thing you wish the world knew.
something I wish that everybody in the world knew: the only person responsible for you is you.
Yeah,
That ultimately you are responsible for everything in your life. And that the sooner that you accept and embrace that, the better your life is going to be. Um, you're responsible for your safety. You're responsible for your feeding. You're responsible for your care. That you may be hopefully interdependent with other people and not dependent on them. That interdependence is a beautiful thing, but that like in the end, it's your responsibility.
that's good. That's so good. Yeah. And it's the
And
same for your children. They need to realize that they are the only one in charge of themselves too.
yeah, and
Eventually. Eventually, right?
it is, and I think I think if parents, this was the my image is my view of myself as a parent is: are you going to be a fully functional adult when you're
Mm-hmm.
an adult? When you're 18 and I yeet you out the door, are you functional? I did not yeet
Exactly.
my kids out the door, but are you capable of being a fully functional human being?
Yeah.
And I don't think that does not seem to be what a lot of people are trying to accomplish.
Agreed. Agreed. Unfortunately.
Hmm.
But if they realize this for themselves, they would want that for their children, I believe. I
Yeah.
think you're right.
Mhm.
So thank you
You're
for all of
welcome.
this today. I look forward to listening to it back, and then I'm sure I'm going to have you
So
back again in the future to
that
talk
sounds
about
good.
some
Would love to. I love doing this.
more.
Yeah.
So if you want to connect with Jake, you can reach him at jake@breath.energy, or you can visit his website, www.breath.energy. Thanks, Jake.
All right. Thanks, Jerry. Good to see you.
Bye. Good to see you
Bye.
too.